Paul is one whom we look to as a spiritual giant, a man whose writings preachers and teachers consult daily as we grapple with issues and concerns of the spiritually minded in an ultra modern world. I want you to understand what this great man has intimated here. He said, in effect, I am still not all that I should be. Now, how much more can we say that of ourselves? We are not all that we should be. But thanks be unto God, we are not all that we used to be either. Yes, we may have a long way to go, but we must give thanks to where God, or for where God has brought us from, as we continue to press to where he is leading us. How many of you are grateful for where God has brought you from? I have to admit, I am tremendously impressed by Paul's humble assessment of himself. And it is all the more refreshing to me as we consider the time we live in. What do you mean, Hy? Well, we live in the age of self-promotion. It is a time when everybody is seeking a name, seeking a claim, seeking a title. Something that says, see me and lift me up. If the world doesn't recognize them, they'll come to the church looking for a title. If the church doesn't recognize them, they will make their own titles. We have some deciding bishops in the church. Folk who have decided to become bishops. We have some apostles of what I do not know. But they have made themselves apostles. Had the ceremony. You can get the booklet. But where their apostolate is, or where their bishopric is located, no one knows. Well, I am an apostle to young ministers. Can't you do that as a pastor? Well, let me leave it alone. I'm rambling now. It's just that sometimes titles concern me because people are more title-oriented. Their desire is toward having some sort of recognition than to serving God and doing what God really wants them to do. This is why I am impressed with Paul, who says, I don't count myself to have apprehended. I have not yet arrived. Paul, though, had undoubtedly had an encounter with God. I say this because he laid down his boasting, though he really had plenty of reasons to brag. As a matter of fact, he listed his qualifications just above our text. He wrote, circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as touching the law of Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is in the law, Paul says, I was blameless. The man had grounds to blow his own horns. And let me say something. His reasons were not all listed in this book. Let me give you a little more historical information about Brother Paul. Paul was instructed by the legendary Gamaliel, one of the greatest rabbis in the entire history of Judaism. He was also one of, if not the youngest man to ever sit on the great Sanhedrin, the ruling body consisting of 70 elders and the high priest ruling over Israel. Paul was a man of wealth. He was a man of great privilege. I could go on, but I think you really get the point. He was a profound and phenomenal man. And yet, all of these extraordinary qualities, positions, and associations he willfully surrendered and relinquished in his pursuit for excellence in Christ. I'm going somewhere today, y'all. Paul said, "What things were gain to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Yea, doubtless, and I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, that I may win Christ." This man used to regard his outward privileges one by one as items of gain, but now Paul comes to regard them all in the aggregate sense as a loss. One single loss because of Christ. What are you saying, Hi? I'm saying that Paul would have rather had Jesus than silver or gold. He would rather have had Jesus than material things. He would rather have had Jesus than fame and fortune. I wonder if there's anybody here who'd rather have Jesus. If I have to make a choice, I'd rather have Jesus. I don't know about you, but I'd rather have Jesus. And so Paul writes this. He says, "Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." Paul shared that he had not been brought to a place of spiritual maturity that was so complete that there was no more room for growth. His attitude is the kind of attitude that we all must have toward our growth in grace. As God's children, we grow in degrees of spiritual maturity. But we have to come to understand that we will never be spiritually mature in the absolute sense in this world. As long as you are alive, there is room for growth. As long as you draw breath, there is room for improvement in your spiritual walk. It does not matter how long you've been saved, you still have not arrived.